Hello and welcome back to my small little library. Today's video is gonna be the February wrap-up for 2023. It is already March, which time is flying. But yeah, I thought I'd do a quick wrap-up of everything I've read in February, and it was really mixed. I had some really bad ones and some really good ones. Let's get into it. Okay, so I started the month with a book in German, which is Das Labyrinth der träumenden Bücher, which in English is The Labyrinth of Dreaming Books. This is by Walter Mörs. It hurt so much. I really love the first one. This is a second one. In a series, it has the main character is the same as in the first one, but it plays 200 years roughly after the first one. And our main character goes back to the city he went to in the first book and is supposed to have some adventure there. The biggest problem was this book practically ends where the adventure starts, and the whole thing that this book is pretty much just like a bridge between book 1 and book 3, because there's nothing happening here other than people telling him what has changed in the city that he's come back to. That is all that is happening. I was really disappointed. There is nothing really interesting in here. If you like puppet theater, then there's a lot of that in here, because pretty much the story of the first book is told in here through a puppet theater. Why? I have no idea, because you supposedly have read part 1 if you want to read part 2. I don't know. It's really confusing. I gave it 2 stars because the writing style is still the same, and I mean, I really like the world. It just was so uninteresting that I was really disappointed in it, and I don't own book 3. I read this one because I own it already. But yeah, I'm not sure if I will read part 3, just because I'm so disappointed in part 2 that, yeah, I kind of don't really have the motivation to continue with part 3. But yeah, a really disappointing start to the month, but yeah, what can you do, right? Sometimes the second book in a series just is really hit or miss, and in this case, it was a pretty big miss, sadly. Then the month continued with a book that I got recommended, I think on Instagram. I wanted to read more like thriller, crimi type of books, and somebody recommended to start the Harry Holes series, and this is The Bet by Jo Nesbø. That is the first one in the Harry Holes series, and yeah, I have kind of a mixed feeling about this. I gave it 3 stars. The main character is really interesting. He's pretty much like a dry alcoholic. He has his problems and his demons, which I won't go into because it would be spoilers, but yeah. There are a lot of problems here with the main character. All of the characters were really like grayish characters. But for me personally, it was too much character introduction and too little actually the case, which I don't enjoy that much in crime novels. I would have preferred more of the case being like the main focus of the book. But then again, this is part 1 in like a long series, and it is kind of an introduction to our main character, the detective, which we follow throughout the series, which is why I gave 3 stars, because I liked the rest, you know. I didn't like where the focus of the story was, but the way the story was told, I thought was quite nice. Also, the topic being set in Australia, even though our main character, our detective, is from Norwegian, I think. So yeah, I am interested to see where the series continues, so I will at some point read part 2. Interesting, but not really what I wanted, is like my end opinion about the book. Then after that one, I continued with the series I want to get through this year, which is the Martian series by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is part 5, The Chessmen of Mars. This whole series is really formulaic. It's pretty much all I can say about it. You have John Carter, who somehow ended up on Mars, and he makes his way up to being like the overlord of Mars, over some of the people, and he's like he can just spring, can jump really really high, and he's really really good at swords and stuff. And yeah, at this point he has a son and a daughter. Though I feel like the daughter was only written into the story for book 5, because before she wasn't ever mentioned, even though in book 4 John Carter's son was the main character, and his sister is only a year younger, and he is an adult in part 4, so she should have been mentioned somewhere if she would have already been there. But yeah, this feels like he just needed a new character he could write into the novel, and so he chose to give him a daughter. And in this book, the daughter gets kidnapped, more or less, by some really weird Martian people, and yeah, but the guy who likes her rescues her, and yeah, the books are really formulaic. I kind of enjoy them. I enjoy them enough to continue with the series, but then again, I think it gets boring after a while, because you feel like you've read the story already in the first 4 books, and then you read it again in the 5th book, even though this time around the main character isn't male but female. But yeah, somehow the story always ends up the same, that you have like a woman who gets kidnapped, and then a guy who gets to rescue her and then gets to marry her. It's pretty much the gist of these stories, but I like the fighting. I like the idea of Mars that Edgar Rice Burroughs had, and so I do continue with the series. Yeah, 3 stars, as all of the rest have gotten. Nothing new there, sadly. Then we had a really nice surprise. Because I've read the Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This was in one of the boxes in the Fairy Loot, and I was really afraid that I wouldn't like it, because it is like a fae story. We have Emily Wilde, our main character, and she researches fae, and she goes to like this really remote land to research them there, and then a colleague of hers, well, joins her even though she doesn't want it, and more or less helps her in her research, and the story goes from there. And I assumed that this was a romance story, and it is kind of a romance story, but not really like in like a traditional sense. Because our main character really isn't good with people. She doesn't have the best people skills in general, and so she makes herself her life harder, because she isn't really the nicest to the folks that live where she's doing her research. And so, yeah, she doesn't see a lot of social cues. She doesn't understand why people are angry with her when she refuses to give her a meal. Well, they want to like pay for her meal, and she refuses to because she wants to do it all herself. And so, yeah, there's a lot of like misunderstandings there, but totally realistic misunderstandings, if you get me. So yeah, there's a little bit of romance, but it's kind of like an awkward romance, and I kind of like that, to be honest. I gave it 4 stars in the end. It is, I think, one of my first fae books. I haven't really read much in that direction, because I felt like a lot of them were young adult, and I struggle with young adults sometimes. This one is an adult book, so we don't have like the young adult factor, and fairies here are more like, well, they are researched by her and her colleague, and they aren't like the main character where our girls falls in love with like a fae prince, that kind of story that seems to be everywhere. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked the adventure. I liked a lot of like the research and her like wanting to do it all herself, but like then realizing that with help she can do a lot more. And yeah, I really liked it. Also, it's historical fiction, because I think it's like around the 1900s or something like that, the year in which this plays out. So yeah, and it is kind of like a roughly normal Earth, but with different names, I feel like. So it really doesn't play out in our world, but in a world that is kind of similar. But yeah, really liked it. Also, really pretty book. And it was a great surprise because I really thought I wouldn't like it, and in the end, I really enjoyed it. Also, if I haven't said it, it's by Heather Fawcett, Emily White's Encyclopedia of Fairies. And then the book I read after that was my Illumicrate book, and that is God Killer by Hannah Kaner. This one sounded really interesting. It's pretty much like a fantasy novel where there are gods that take form and people pray to gods. Well, they at some point pray to gods. And our main character, her family suffered at the hand of a fire god, and she was the only one that survived because of her father. And so she then goes into the profession of killing gods. And yeah, so her job is like going around and killing gods. And she has that job because the king, they had a big war where like humans and gods were like both in the war. And the king made sure that like the gods lost all their power and that it wasn't allowed to pray to the gods anymore. And pretty much when people stop praying to the gods lose all of their power. And so she is now going around and killing like the gods that pop up where people start new altars, because it's hard for people to like stop praying to gods because that is what they have always done. And yeah, at some point in her journey, she meets a little girl who is connected with a god. A small little god that lives with her, and it's a really weird thing, and she decides to help the girl, and so she has to travel to the city where the main focus of the war was, where there are still gods living there in the aftermath. And she wants to like get help from a god to help the little girl, and on their travels they meet a knight from the king who also has the same goal to get to that city, because the king is suffering and he wants to help the king. And they band together, and in the end they have a lot of gods to fight, and they have like a really adventurous journey. And I think the book was really, really great. I gave it 4 stars. I also really liked the ending, which was really, really nice. So I'm looking forward to the next part because I'm sure there will be a next part. But yeah, there's a lot of adventure. I like the way that it is done, how the gods can be killed, how the gods exist, and just like the whole world, how it's made up is kind of really interesting, and so I really, really enjoyed that. There's I always struggle with like romance in fantasy books because a lot of the time I feel like it's kind of forced because there has to be some romance in there. I didn't really enjoy the fact that much, which is why I gave it 4 stars, because for me, like, I don't think it's necessary just that every fantasy book has to have a romance in there, but that is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, in the end, I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. And also, that copy that I have is so, so pretty, especially if you, like, open it up. You have, like, these really pretty gold leaves in there. It's just, yeah. It's a really pretty edition, and I was really happy that I really enjoyed the book. After that, I sadly picked a book that was really, really bad in my opinion. The book is called LAPD 53 and it's by James Ellroy. This is how it looks. It is a true crime book. And I wanted like a palette cleanser in between, so I picked it up from a library as an ebook, and it was described as a book of shots from crime scenes, like photos of crime scenes, and then a description of what happened there and what the case was. But for me, like, it was more like a book the author wrote because he wanted to tell how good life was back then in 53. And how he doesn't really like it now, and how law enforcement was kind of cooler back then, and now all of the sentences are so long this way around, and cops can't be as badass, and back then cops could be really badass and stuff. I found it to be really weird especially if you think about it, that the book was written in 2015. Um, yeah, I think it's a weird perspective to be like sad about um, really horrific people getting really, really little sentences. So, yeah. Also, I really didn't enjoy the writing style of the author. He talks in like a really cool kid voice, even though he was already like over 60 when he wrote the book. It just reads really, really weird. It reads like the old man around the corner who wants to talk cool like the kids, you know. I just didn't vibe with it. Also, like the descriptions had so little to do with the actual cases, and it felt just wrong to look at the pictures with the commentary. I don't know. If I look at crime scene photos, I want like a description of what happened, what the cops did to catch the guy, and not like a glorification of the days back then. So I gave it 1 star. I just couldn't give it anything else. I just don't think it's a good book. Please don't pick it up. It really isn't worth it, and I'm glad I just lent it from my library and didn't pay any money for that, to be honest, because I don't think it's worth any money. I'm sorry, but yeah, I really dislike that book. Naturally, after like reading a book that is bad in my opinion, I had a really, really good read, and that is Doctor Sleep by Stephen King. This is the part two to The Shining. Um, I absolutely loved it. Um, I think you have to be aware that obviously the horror from The Shining isn't here anymore, because that is a horror you can only do once, to be honest. But I think this one looks more into like the consequences of The Shining, because here our main character is Danny, or Dan, the son of our main character in The Shining, and he's now an adult, and he is struggling with The Shining. He has really a lot of visions, a lot of really bad visions, and he starts drinking because of that. And so this book kind of like chronicles the life of an alcoholic who then goes through AA meetings and stops drinking. And yeah, then he there's a girl who seeks contact with him through The Shining, and she seems to be in danger, and so he has to help her, and she does everything. Well, he tries to help her as best as he can, and the adversaries in this book are kind of like vampires, but they don't drink blood, they drink the dying essence of humans that were tortured. Like, if they suffer pain, the essence is better. And yeah, they have a hunger for shining children. And that is what the book is about. And I absolutely loved it. I think it's a really, really deserving second book, because I think it's only a duology, which wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't want the third book here, but I think it's like a really good like, and this is what happened 20 years later, you know. Um, yeah, and it was so raw and human, the book, which I think I loved that in Stephen King. I had the same feeling when I read the Pet Cemetery, because I felt like that book had more like realistic horror and like the family interactions when it came to that. And I think this one as well is like, you see a human that is suffering, because then he does suffer from his shining, but also a human that like fights through that, and who tries to do the best that he can, and he tries to redeem himself for like maybe bad things that he's done, and he tries to do the best he can. And I think it's like this journey he takes you on that is really impactful. So I would definitely say, if you haven't read it yet, but you read The Shining, pick it up, give it a go. I think it's a really great sequel to The Shining. 5 stars, obviously, you know. Yeah. Big fan of Stephen King, I'm sorry. Then next I listened to an audiobook, which is The Clocks by Agatha Christie. I gave it 3 stars. I don't think an Agatha Christie book will ever get something different. I didn't dislike it. I didn't really love it. It is a case where you have it is a Hercule Poirot case, though he only has a really, really small part in it. but a really weird part because he never gets to the scene, but in the end he tells everyone who the perpetrator was, which I thought was a really weird concept. The case in itself was fine. We have like a guy who dies in the home of a blind woman, and between the maid finding the dead guy and calling the police and the police coming in, some clocks vanish in that room, and that is the case that is there. But yeah, I thought it was really, really weird. I like that Pierrot hasn't the biggest role because I find him to be kind of annoying, to be honest. But yeah, I just have mixed feelings about Agatha Christie, and I don't think that will ever change. But yeah, maybe, a really, really good Agatha Christie book that maybe can sway my opinion to the positive. Leave it down below in the comments. But yeah, I haven't found one yet that I really, really liked. Okay, and then we have 2 books left that I've read. The first is Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. This is also a book about substance abuse. This one really, really hurt. You have our main character who is an undercover cop, and he's undercover trying to bust like the drug ring who sells substance D, which is called substance death because it kind of scrambles the person's brain and they die slowly because of it. And in his pursuit of like getting the criminals, he gets addicted to substance D. And pretty much the book is just, well, it's Philip K. Dick's experience with drug abuse. Because he talks about it in the end. I won't tell you how the story goes, but he has like an afterword after the book, and he talks about this being his own kind of like his own experience with drug abuse because he also was addicted to drugs and he lost a lot of friends to it, and it is a really impactful book. But I think it is really hard to read if you know people who suffer from substance abuse. You have so many of like these things people on drugs do, like really like weird conversations and paranoia, and all of those things are in here and they're described so good that yeah, I really fed the book. But I do think that it's not for everyone. I think Philip K. Dick is like kind of harder to read sometimes. So yeah, if you can't deal with like senseless conversations and really weird scenes, this might not be for you. But I gave it 4 stars. I would say I enjoyed it. I found it really, really hard to read, but I think it's really impactful, and for that it is a good book. And so yeah, if you ever wanted to read a book about drugs, substance abuse by someone who abused substances, go for it. And then the last one, and by far the best book of the month, is The Way of Kings Part 2. I finally read it, and it is so good. I don't know why I took so long to read it. I hate myself for it, but yeah, I love Kaladin's story, I love Shallon's story. Just The Way of Kings just is a brilliant book, and I'm really looking forward to reading Part 2, but I don't own that yet, so that will have to wait. But yeah, absolutely fantastic, high fantasy. Pretty much all of the 600 pages of the second part is really like a showdown to things changing and people finding out where they are in the story, and everyone is kind of like finding his own powers, his own abilities, and where he stands in the story at the point where we are right now, and it is so great. I'm absolutely in love with this book. Yeah, I don't want to spoil the story if you haven't read it yet, but I do think that a lot of people already have read it. I'm really, really late to the party. But yeah. The Way of Kings is 1,200 pages long, so I have these like split up editions, which is why I read the second part now. But yeah, they have like these really nice golden spray pages. I don't know. I love this book. It is just good. It's so fun to read, and it's so interesting, and the whole world of Cosmere is like the universe this place in, and just the whole lore of the world and the Voidbringers and everything like that. The Dawn Charts and all of that is just so interesting that I can't wait to see where we are going with the second book. And yeah, I'm really into it. Really into it. Yeah, if you haven't picked up The Wave Kings, do it. Just like do it. It's so good. So long, but it's so good. And yeah, that are all the books I've read in February. So as you can see, I had some really good books and some really bad books. So that kind of like evens itself out. Let's just like say it like it is. And yeah, I really enjoyed my reading in February. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, leave a like, a comment, maybe subscribe if you want to. And I hope I will see you in the next video. And yeah.